Hello and welcome to this quick session on camera settings mastery. I'm super excited to have you guys here. So I'm Kelly Perrin, and today we're going to focus on helping you feel more confident using your camera's manual mode. And by the end of the session, you should have a solid understanding of the exposure triangle, your key camera settings, and how to apply them in various shooting scenarios. So let's get started. Before we start, I just want to share this quote with you. Photography is the story I fail to put into words. Photography is the story I fail to put into words. Now, I chose this quote because it perfectly captures what photography is all about, that profound way to express ourselves. And it sets the right tone for our course today, where I'm going to help you to learn your camera settings so you can tell your own unique stories effectively. So the foundation of understanding manual mode on your camera is the exposure triangle, which consists of three elements: aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. And these three elements work together to control the exposure of your photo. Aperture affects the depth of field, shutter speed affects the motion, and ISO determines your camera's sensitivity to light. So we're going to look into each of those components in more detail. So first off, aperture. Aperture is the opening in your lens that controls how much light enters the camera, and it's measured in f-stops. Now, a wide aperture like f1.8 creates a shallow depth of field, which is perfect for portraits where you want to get that nice blurry background. On the other hand, a narrow aperture like f16 gives you a deep depth of field, which is great for landscapes where you really want everything front and back to be in focus. Next, we have shutter speed. Now, this refers to how long your camera's shutter stays open when it's taking a photo, and it's measured in seconds or fractions of a second. A fast shutter speed, like 1/1000 of a second, freezes motion in time, making it ideal for action shots, like capturing water droplets, as you can see at the top here, or if you want to freeze any kind of fast-moving object. A slow shutter speed, like 1/30th of a second, allows for motion blur, which can be creatively used for creating that moving water effect that you can see below. Or if you want to get really creative and you want to try some light trails, then a slow shutter speed is perfect for that. Lastly, we have our ISO. ISO controls your camera's sensitivity to light. A low ISO, like 100, is perfect when you're working in really bright conditions, and it produces a clean, noise-free image. A high ISO, like 1600, is more useful in low light conditions, but it can introduce noise or graininess into your photos. So the key is finding the balance to maintain the quality that you want in your images. So let's look at some scenarios and how we can put this exposure triangle together. So for portrait photography, we want to use a wide aperture like f2.8, which is going to help create that beautiful blurry background that's going to isolate your subject. Your shutter speed will be between 125 to 250ths of a second. It's usually sufficient enough to avoid any kind of motion blur and keep your ISO low around 100 to 200 if you're shooting in really good light. Next, let's look at action photography. So we're going to want a fast shutter speed like 1/500th of a second or even faster. It's essential that we get a really quick shutter speed so we can freeze that motion. Use a moderate aperture around f.4 to f.8 to maintain your focus on your subject while keeping some depth of field, and adjust your ISO according to the available light to ensure your image isn't too dark. Thirdly, let's look at if we're doing landscape photography. You're going to want a narrow aperture like f11 or f16 to ensure that both your foreground and your background are in sharp focus. Now, if you're using a slow shutter speed to capture more light, make sure you're going to use a tripod in these situations so you don't get any camera shake. Keep your ISO as low as possible to maintain your image clarity. And lastly, one of my personal favorites is when you're shooting low light photography, you're going to want to use a wide aperture like f1.8. If you have a more kind of expensive professional lens, you might find that you can get down to 1.4, 1.2, and you're going to want to allow in as much light as possible into your lens. So we need a slow shutter speed as well, which can be useful, but if you can't use a tripod, be careful with how slow you go to avoid any blur in your images. And you're going to want to increase your ISO. But again, be cautious, because if you go too high, you're going to introduce noise. Take a moment, take a screenshot of this page, or pause the video now and make a note of these settings, as they're a really great starting point for you and your camera. So now it's your turn. Set your camera to manual mode, choose one of the scenarios that we discussed, and adjust your settings accordingly. Take a few test shots and then observe the differences as you're moving those 3 different elements to work out which one is working best for you in the scenario that you're in. If you have any questions or you want some additional guidance, just reach out and ask me. I'm here to help you. Your journey to mastering manual photography doesn't end here. You have to practice regularly to build up your confidence. And don't forget, I've got the free downloadable cheat sheet. I'll put a link below, which is going to summarize everything for you. And if you're ready for some more in-depth learning, then why not consider joining my full photography course, details of which you can find below. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you found this session valuable. Feel free to reach out with any questions and stay connected through my website or my social media. Keep shooting through that camera. It's the only way you're going to build confidence. And remember, it's fun. Practice, play around with the settings. You have got this.